Retcons are common in superhero comics, but many big changes flew under the radar and remained unnoticed by fans. Marvel Comics has been retconning its superheroes ever since the golden age of comics, and it isn't stopping anytime soon. 10. Ms. Marvel's Kamala Khan embiggening replaced hulking out. Kamala Khan embiggins her arm in Captain Marvel, 2012. To her fans, the reader-friendly Ms. Marvel's Kamala Khan signature catchphrase in Power is embiggen. Whenever she embiggened, Kamala basically became a fun but unstoppable rubber hose cartoon character. But when she was teased in the end of Captain Marvel's 2012 run, Kamala's powers were hinted to be hulking out. In her faceless cameo, Kamala's arm was shown bulking up into a bodybuilder's physique. This was reportedly done because Marvel wanted to tease Kamala, but hadn't yet finalized her powers. It was only when artist Adrian Alphona drew Kamala's now iconic playful and elastic embiggening that her hulking out was retconned. 9. Namor the Submariner's fish-based powers were too embarrassing. Namor becomes a puffer fish in Strange Tales, 1951. Since the untrustworthy Namor the Submariner was one of the first superheroes ever made, it made sense that his powers were being physically fit. Namor had the added bonus of flight thanks to his ankle wings, and being able to live in the ocean's depths. In the 60s, Marvel updated his powers by making him mimic sea creatures' abilities. During this period, Namor could summon an electric eel's electricity or inflate himself like a pufferfish. These silly powers were too ridiculous even by the cartoony standards of the Silver Age. Shortly after Namor debuted these powers, Marvel retconned them and never mentioned them again. Since then, Namor stuck to his classic powers. 8. Moon Knight's Egyptian lore replaced his werewolf counters. Moon Knight attacks Jack Russell in Werewolf by Night. Moon Knight's costume and gimmick were his tributes to Khonshu, the ancient Egyptian god of the moon. Mark Spector was just the latest in the line of many Moon Knights who Khonshu brought back from the dead to be his avatar and fist. But when he first appeared, Mark donned the moon's image to punch werewolves. Previously, Moon Knight only existed to be Werewolf by Midnight's Jack Russell, nemesis. His silver moon weapons mocked and harmed werewolves, and he only got his super strength after being bitten by Russell. When Moon Knight became a breakout star, these practical counters to werewolves were retconned into the moon in Egyptian myths. 7. Johnny Storm was not the first Human Torch. Johnny Storm flames on and the Human Torch fights in World War II. Today, the codename Human Torch is synonymous to Johnny Storm, the Fantastic Four's youngest and most relatable member. However, he didn't always own this name. The name belonged to the fiery android and World War II hero from the golden age of comics. They even fought beside Captain America and Namor the Submariner. When Marvel Comics acquired Timely Comics, they repurposed the latter's heroes into the Marvel Universe. Meanwhile, the Human Torch was retconned out of existence while their name was given to Johnny. Johnny became one of Marvel's most recognized heroes, while the Human Torch was left in obscurity and historical flashbacks. 6. Hank Pym was a scientist from a horror comic. Hank Pym runs away from ants and tails to astonish, 1959. Hank Pym, the original Ant-Man, is one of Marvel's most prominent scientists. But given his genius intellect, reclusive behavior, and love of ants, Hank seemed more like a mad scientist than a superhero. Unsurprisingly, Hank's debut wasn't in a superhero comic. Hank first appeared in a campy sci-fi story from the horror anthology Tales to Astonish. Here, Hank created a shrinking serum, was almost killed by ants, and learned from his hubris. The issue sold so well that writer Stan Lee turned Hank into a superhero. When Hank joined the Marvel Universe, he was quietly retconned into a different person. Nobody noticed this, and Hank was immortalized as an egotistical and nigh immoral scientist. 5. Iron Man posed as Tony Stark Jr.'s bodyguard. Tony Stark runs away too. Iron Man's contemporary selling point is that he doesn't hide the fact that he's the celebrity billionaire Tony Stark Jr. to most Marvel fans, especially those who grew up with the MCU. This was a basic facet of Tony's character. But in truth, this was a fairly recent addition. For most of his lifespan, Tony claimed that Iron Man was his bodyguard. Tony did this to protect his loved ones and business. He also claimed that Iron Man was America's avatar, which is why he initially fought business rivals who conveniently represented America's enemies. As Tony's character deepened and after the first Iron Man's success, Iron Man's cover story was quietly retconned so that Tony never had a secret identity. 4. The Incredible Hulk was gray and talked properly. The Gray Hulk swats a scientist aside in The Incredible Hulk, 1962. The underused street-smart Gray Hulk, aka Joe Fixit, could be read as Bruce Banner's juvenile power fantasy. The Gray Hulk only made occasional appearances, while the brutish Green Hulk, aka Savage Hulk, was Banner's most prominent alter ego. Ironically, the Gray Hulk was both the first Hulk in Stan Lee and Jack Kirby's original vision of the hero. In his first issue, the Hulk was gray and spoke proper English. But thanks to a printing error, Hulk looked green or yellow in some pages. To emphasize his parallels to Frankenstein's monster and help colorist Stan Goldberg, Hulk was retconned into a child-minded green giant just one issue later. This retcon was so well received it became permanent. 3. Ms. Marvel was Carol Danvers' separate alter ego. Carol Danvers remembers becoming Ms. Marvel in Ms. Marvel, 1976. The criminally underrated Captain Marvel is one of the most retconned Marvel heroes around. One of her biggest changes related to the time when Captain Marvel, then Ms. Marvel, and Carol Danvers used to be two distinct identities. Carol blacked out in times of great danger so that her half-Kree, warrior self could emerge and save her. If Carol was an ordinary human, Ms. Marvel was a powerful Kree warrior. What's more, Ms. Marvel got her powers from an alien-made suit. When Carol and Ms. Marvel were retconned into the singular Captain Marvel, her dual identities and reliance on a costume were quietly replaced by her current independent persona and natural powers. 2. The Punisher didn't always have a moral compass. The Punisher opens fire at litterers in Peter Parker, The Spectacular Spider-Man, 1976. The only thing that separated the Punisher, Frank Castle, from the monsters he killed was his moral code. He had a strict rule against not killing or even injuring innocent bystanders, especially women and children. But during his early tenure as a Spider-Man villain, the Punisher was an uncontrollable and overzealous vigilante. Besides being an easily fooled hired gun who worked for the Jackal in his debut, the Punisher killed indiscriminately. He conflated jaywalkers with war criminals and wanted to execute them all. The Punisher's bloodlust was quietly retconned when he got a solo run that changed him from a rampaging mass murderer to a stoic tragic figure. 1. Spider-Man's pretentious objectivist phase almost derailed his character. Peter Parker barely hides his contempt for Protesting in The Amazing Spider-Man, 1963. Spider-Man, Peter Parker, is loved for being a progressive icon who represented everyday, working-class people, especially the youth. But if his co-creator Steve Ditko had his way, Spider-Man would have been a bitter and contemptuous conservative. He would have also been an ardent believer in Ayn Rand's selfish worldview. Ditko was an objectivist, and he wrote Peter to be one. In a now infamous page, Peter scolded student protesters for standing up and barely stopped himself from punching them. Marvel quickly retconned this by never mentioning it again. It was only acknowledged in 2014, when Peter apologized for his pretentious Randian phase in college.